All right, Chapter 8, Greenhorn. The Greenhorn's Welcome. Oh, the lamps in the bunkhouse sent a warm glow across the yard, but Gus felt everything but warm and comfortable as he stepped into the crude building where he would spend the night. Glancing across the room, he saw some of the men in their long underwear lying in their bunks. Others were sitting on the benches talking, and a few were huddled around the stoves playing checkers. Gus could not believe the horrible smell. Haven't these guys ever heard of using a deodorant? He wondered. Adding to the odor of unshowered lumberjacks were racks full of wet mittens and socks and steaming above the stoves. What a sight, thought Gus. What a smell. I bet Mr. Christie at school would really think this was great. A real bunkhouse. Gus made his way through the men to the bunk Tommy had assigned him. He was hoping Tommy would already be there, but so he would know someone. Just then, Gus heard a friendly voice among the lumberjacks. It was Tommy. He was there, standing in his long red underwear, talking with some of the men in the rear of the bunkhouse. "There you are, boy. Do you remember to bring the swamp grass for your bed like I told you?" Gus scrunched up his face. He'd been busy all day, and he had forgotten. "No matter," Tommy continued. "I got you some hay feathers and got your bunk set up. When you're ready, strip the skunkies, or skip to your skinnies, and roll in." Gus was grateful for Tommy's friendship. It was good to know that he'd be in the bunk below, and a good idea to sleep in a room full of strangers that had been bothering Gus. Gus looked around at the faces of the men. "Let me do some introductions. Tommy," said Tommy. "Boys," he called out in a loud voice, "I want you to meet Gus, the boy from the Slash and Fire. Some of you might have had an introduction to him this morning at breakfast." Gus could hear the men grumble in response to the comment. "Gus here is lending a hand in the cook shack. He's the new crumb chaser." Gus saw that some of the men continued what they were doing as if Tommy said nothing to them. One old man who was playing checkers had lean, a hawk-like face, gave Gus a smile, and seemed to curl up his mustache. "Welcome, Greenhorn. I'm Moonshine Jay." The men around the checker table all nodded their heads and welcomed him back to the game. A Jack with 2 weeks' growth of whiskers on his face, breath so bad he could melt a candle, came up and introduced himself. "Boy," he said, "I'm Rat Hole Andy, the meanest whiskey-fighting man on this camp and the most independent man on earth. There ain't no law that can touch me. Not even smallpox can catch me. I don't fear man nor beast or even the devil, but it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, boy. But I warn you, don't like no buckwheaters." Gus swallowed hard and smiled. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir." "Hey, the boy's got manners. I like that in a boy." Andy smiled at Gus. Half of the lumberjack's teeth were missing, and the other half were rotten and covered in dirty brown juice. Gus wanted to turn away, but he knew he better not. For a time, Gus was saved from Rat Hole Andy by Tommy's introductions of other lumberjacks. He met Cousin Jack, the Cornish cousin man, Choppin' Charlie, and many others. Gus knew he would never remember their names by the morning. "Hey, Tommy," called Rat Hole Andy. "Have you taught the boy the Lumberjack Commandments yet?" Tommy looked up at Andy and gave him a dirty look. "Ah, leave the boy alone. He's worked hard today. He's tired." Andy got real close to Gus's face. This is the meanest whiskey-fighting man in camp, thought Gus. He stood still as Andy crinkled up one eye and smiled big, smelly green right into Gus's face. "Tommy," he said as brown juice oozed out of his mouth, "let me ask the boy if he would like to learn the commandments." Gus was sure by now that he had no choice. Andy looked mean and smelled worse. "Yes, sir, I would like to learn the commandments." "See, Tommy, you got yourself a polite boy here." Just then, old Moonshine Jay stood up, pushing his chair back from his checker game. "Being I'm the oldest Jack and the orneriest Jack in here in this neck of the woods, Andy, don't you suppose it's my job to teach this here greenhorn the commandments?" Moonshine Jay stared a mean, insistent look at Andy. "You know there, old man, you're probably right on both counts," said Andy, and he stood aside for Moonshine to be seen clearly. The old man pulled his suspenders, then he licked his fingers and curled up the ends of his mustache with spit. In a loud, deep voice, he said, "Repeat after me. Thou shalt not make to thyself any comforts. Thou shalt not take thy boss's name in vain. You will work from sun up until after sundown 6 days a week and be glad to have a job. Thou shalt always speak well of your brother Jack's, and you will never, ever kiss another Jack's girl. That's it, of course, without permission. You got all that, boy? Now repeat it." Gus got it. It's kind of a joke, making fun of working lumber camp. With only a little help from Tommy, Gus repeated the words and Moonshine had spoken, and when he finished, the men all clapped and patted Gus on the back. "There you go, boy. You're a real Jack now," said Moonshine. "And in celebration here, let's have a pinch of snooze." Moonshine reached down deep in his dirty pant pockets and pulled out some brown flaky stuff. "Here, have a chew on me." At first, Gus thought he was kidding and shook his head no. Tommy elbowed Gus in the ribs. "You can't turn him down, boy. This old man runs the bunkhouse. You gotta take it out of respect. It's only chewing tobacco," whispered Tommy. Gus walked over and held his hand out till Moonshine, who dropped a pinch of its stuff in his hand. "Hey, fellas," called Andy. "I don't think this here boy's ever chewed before." The men all stared in surprise at Gus. "There's nothing to it," Andy continued. "Just put a wad in the side of your lip, and when you work up a spit, let it fling." Gus wrinkled up his face, took a pinch between his fingers, turned to Tommy. "I can't do this," he whispered. "If my mom knew, she would ground me for life." Just as Andy interrupted, "If you don't like the kind, boy, there's plenty of others to try." "Hey, Andy," said Tommy, "why don't you tell the boy the tale of the chewing while he tries his first dip?" Gus gave Tommy a dirty look, but Tommy only winked as he tried to turn everyone's attention away from Gus. "Yeah, Andy," said Gus, who now understood Tommy's plan. "Tell me the story about chewing, and if I don't like this kind, then maybe I'll try out the others." "That's the spirit, boy," growled Moonshine, as he stood to spit down brown tobacco juice into the can beside the checkered board, and then sat down. Gus could tell Andy liked to hear himself talk, and he could tell the story would take a while. Gus dropped some of the chew onto the floor and put his foot to cover it up. "Well, the story goes like this," began Andy. "Only sissies smoke cigarettes or pimp sticks, and the only bosses smoke cigars, so that's leaving tobacco chewing to us Jacks. Now, there are several types of tobacco, like Spearhead, Battle Axe, Five Brothers, Peerless. You chew these till the flavor is all gone, and then you take it out and lay it somewhere to dry, and after it's all dried out like that, you smoke it in your pipe, like old Moonshine does right after his grub in the evening. Right, Moonshine?" "That's right, Andy," responded Moonshine. "You know, after you smoke it in the pipe, you can take the ashes and put them in your boots to cut down on the foot stink. That's why all of our wet socks here smell so good when they're drying like tobacco chew." Gus looked at Tommy and swallowed hard. "Why, I've been in some camps where you have to sleep outside because the steaming socks smell so bad over the fire, but not ours, right, boys?" The men all nodded their heads with satisfaction. "After you smoke your pipe, you stash what you don't use in your socks, and you can scrape out and get yourself Swedish brain powder. Now that will give you a clear lift up through the trees," Moonshine called out. "Tell 'em about Scandinavian dynamite." "I was getting to that, old man. Don't you get your suspenders in a knot," said Andy. "Scandinavian dynamite is the tar ball left in your pipe. Now you chew that. It's nasty stuff, and it'll turn your insides green. It will. Ain't that right, boys?" All the men chimed in to agree. While everybody was agreeing with everyone else, Gus dropped more of the chewing tobacco, grinding it into the dirty floorboards with his boot. Andy strolled over to the potbelly stove where Moonshine was playing checkers. "Come on over here to the amen corner, boy. I want you to see how to do this." So Gus followed Andy over to the stove and watched Andy leaned up for the stove with his hands and his hips and spit long stream of brown juice on the hot stove. There you have it, boy. The best darn air cleaner in the world. It kills germs to boot. Take a deep breath of that, boy. It'll clean your head out every time. Everyone looked at Gus as he was breathing deeply, trying hard not to get sick from the added smell of the tobacco juice on the hot stove. The men all smiled as Gus managed to grin. That smells. Really, really, it does. The men stood wide-eyed as they watched Gus, and they knew he better not say anything more. He knew he wasn't going to get away with not trying the chewing tobacco. Well, boy, pop it in your mouth and tell us what you think. Everyone, even old Moonshine, watched closely. Gus turned to Tommy, who whispered, You're going to have to do it. Just ball it up and hold it in your mouth for a second. You can spit it out as soon as they aren't looking. Fearful that the Jacks would do if he didn't try. Fearful what his mother would do if he did try. Gus shuddered. Then he took the tiny bit of pinch between his fingers, pulled back his lip, and dropped the tobacco in his mouth. Mama's going to be so mad, he thought, for a second, and then he began to taste the burn in his mouth. At first he decided it was just hot. Then it got real bitter, and then his tongue began to burn. You're working up a spit, boy? Howled Andy, and he grinned and showed his dirty brown teeth. Give that boy a spit pail, he called. Everyone's eyes were on Gus. His stomach started to rumble. When the spit pail was passed, he looked into it and saw the vile, nastiest pail of spit that you could ever imagine. I'm going to be sick, Gus yelled as he ran out the door of the bunkhouse. All the men hooted and hollered at Gus and laughed as hard as they could. He's no greenhorn no more, called Moonshine as he went back to his checkers game, quite satisfied with all that had happened. He's just green. When Gus returned, he didn't want to look at anyone. He just wanted to go to bed. Crawling up to the top bunk, he took off his boots, his jeans, his shirt, leaving his long johns, and settled into the bunk. Gus could hear the men talking and laughing about him, but he didn't care. At least he didn't have to have brown, rotted teeth like theirs. Gus just lay down when he heard the clanging sound. Oh no, it can't be time to get up, he thought. I haven't gone to bed yet. Douse the glim, lights out, called the man's voice. It must be the big push, thought Gus, since he and Alice were the only men that didn't bunk with the rest of them. All around the bunkhouse, kerosene lamps went out and wrestled with the other clothes and skinnying down to their long johns in the dark. With everything was quiet, someone at the far end yelled out, Did somebody let Betty in? I don't know what for, was the response. She won't catch no bugs. No, but she kills rats that bring 'em in. Rats? Bugs? In a bunkhouse? Wondered Gus.